epistemology, which deals with knowledge. And if you ask someone to define epistemology, they would often say it's a theory of knowledge. And that's very generic. More specifically, it deals with questions about what can be known and who can know it. I make the case in my research methods courses that everybody is capable intellectually of learning some things, but some people are better prepared to learn them. If, for example, I were to begin to have a conversation on sleep apnea, Dr. Clark will say, you're out of your league, right? Because he is way more qualified and prepared to learn about that, right? As a psychiatrist with a specialty in sleep-related disorders, right? And so you can make a case that even though any of us can learn that information, he is more ready to learn it. And so epistemology deals with not only what we can know, but who can know it. And so that brings us to an interesting sense of, an interesting landing point about faith and issues of Christianity, right? When it comes to God, who can know God? How can God be known, right? Are there limitations, by the way? I remember, and you know this person as well too, Pastor Steve. When I was at Andrews University at the seminary many years, the head of the church history department was Dr. Walter B.T. Douglas, a Grenadian who graduated from McGill University in Canada. And I also worked with him as one of his associate pastors at the All Nations Church in Berrien Springs for about a year or so. And, he used to like to point to the story when Paul met with debaters at the Areopagus, and he said, look, they said, who is this God you're talking about? Who's this God that you keep referring? We don't know this God you're talking about. And he says, well, you have a little stone out there that says, to the unknown God. That's who I'm talking about. And what Dr. Douglas used to say is that God has not left any society, any community, any nation, any people without some knowledge of himself, even though they may not know that they know. Right? It's an interesting thing. You would think, and by the way, if you were not as astute as Paul was, you would think that's some pagan god they're referring to, the unknown God, to the unknown God. Paul says, oh no, that's who I'm talking about, the unknown God. See, he has been here with you and so forth.
I'm going to make him known.
That's right. Now I'm going to introduce him to you. So the idea is not for us as Christians, when we talk about epistemology, we're really looking at more, not who can know, but how can we know? What is the best way to go about understanding what God is? As I've mentioned to you, I've had these interesting ebbs and flows over my lifetime with regards to issues of faith. And I will tell you this is something that I often caution people about. Higher education, particularly, we're talking about post-secondary education, has the advantage of opening perspectives for you, but it also can introduce more avenues for doubt. And I am telling you this, the more you study and the more advanced and the more intricate your approach is to study, the more there is the potential that you could actually start doubting, right? As I mentioned earlier, I teach research methods, and when I teach research methods, there are times I find myself pulling back and wondering, I hope I am not conveying a sense of hopelessness and a sense of not having value for faith by teaching the principles of research, particularly those associated with quantitative methods. All right? Quantitative methods utilizes statistical assumptions, and you build on that, whereas qualitative methods are interpretive. They deal with a first-person experience, and so on and so forth. And I sometimes fear that, if I'm not careful, I may just somehow create more doubt than a possibility of confidence, and that is always a bit of a fear, right? So then, I put all of that in context of what we want to talk about this afternoon, redemptive leadership in a fragmented world. There is ample reason to be skeptical about everything right now. We can't get around the politics of the environment in which we live. There's no way to get around it, right? There is, everything has become almost political. The question of COVID vaccines became political after a while. It was no longer a public health issue. It was a political issue, right? Association, right? And so it's a bit of a challenge. And so there's this fragmentation taking place. But yet, we are called to play a particular role as believers. And that role is this in Matthew 5:14-16. You are the light of the world. Right? You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Right? So as Christians, we're called upon to sort of bring a sense of hope, to shed light on things that confuse people. And the question is, how do we spread light if we don't understand it and we don't embrace it ourselves? And when I talk about light, right, I'm not talking about the light from the perspective of Adventist dogma. That's not what I mean by light, right? Jesus said, I am the light of the world, right? So what I'm advancing to you is that we cannot point people to Christ unless we understand who he is and what he is and have that kind of a relationship with him. I said earlier, I am persuaded that unless the message first impacts me, it can't impact anybody else. Well, guess what? I can't introduce you properly to someone who's a stranger to me just as well. Right? That's an important thing. So right now, we live in this world where a lot of the institutions, the government institutions, the education institutions, healthcare are all very much in flux, right? And I'll show you how. There's a lot of anxiety, for example, right now around Social Security. There's anxiety regarding the future of Medicaid, right? In the state of California, we call it Medi-Cal, right? Just a pass-through. And there are lots of other things that were once a part of the public trust, you know, and that anxiety is really quite palpable. I mean, I'm seeing it every day in my work, every day, and it becomes an issue. Christians, too, by the way, are feeling this level of uncertainty. And I would suggest to you that this is the time that Christians have the opportunity to become leaders and to bring about a sense of hope and bring a sense of redemption in all of this uncertainty. And that means then that we have to assume a certain type of leadership. Now, let me be clear about something. This is developed, our conversation this afternoon is developed in the context of what's happening right now in the United States and in the world, so we can't get around it. I'm not here for political advocacy, but I have to reference the political climate in order to make sense about what we are talking about, okay? So let's talk first about the concept of redemptive leadership. This is something I want to reference, right, in terms of redemptive leadership. The purpose of redemptive leadership, right, is to restore what is broken, to bring healing, and to transform what we think is unjust. That's where we're heading. But that's not necessarily what we're seeing today across the government and private sector. What we are seeing a lot of is what we call transactional leadership. I guess you'll catch up in a moment. This is leadership based on exchange. You give something to me, and I will make you Secretary of Defense. That's transactional leadership, right? And the problem with transactional leadership is that it really prioritizes maintaining systems over transforming them. They will tell you that the effort is to transform the system. That's only so that they can make the system work better to their benefit. That's a transactional leader, right? And so transactional leadership can really entrench injustice, right? They just want to have, whoever is a transactional type of leader, just wants to do for people who can do for them, right? One person I heard saying jokingly, do unto others before they do unto you, all right? And which is radically different from the more Christian-centric value that says, do unto others as you would like to have done unto you. There's a text in the Old Testament that says, whoso rolleth a stone, it shall return upon him, right? And so the idea is that the principle that should guide Christians is that we do what is right because it is right, not because we're expecting something in return. That's an important piece, yes.
How do you define the difference between transactional and transitional?
Transitional, as in changing.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if the purpose is to effect change, that probably will come under redemptive leadership. And I'll talk about that momentarily. So apart from transactional leadership, another approach to leadership that's very common today is what we call transformational leadership. And it sounds amazing. A lot of my faculty colleagues, and I teach a class. Paul, you were a guest lecturer in a class that I teach regularly some time ago, organizational change in human behavior. It's an organization theory, organization change course. I remember one of your slides, change. You remember that? Yeah, it's been a while. It's been a while. It's been a while. I must have you again soon. Yeah. Right? So when we talk about a transformational leadership, it really sounds good because it is really leadership that is driven by a vision. Somebody has a vision and they want something to happen, and the idea is that you inspire people, you motivate them to dream. The problem with transformational leadership by itself is that if you don't have ethical anchors that keep a transformational leader grounded in what is right and what is moral, then the vision that they create can become an idol in and of itself. You become consumed by and enchanted by the vision and not actually what it's requiring of you. In other words, if you don't have a moral compass that grounds a transformational leader, it is just as problematic as transactional leadership. All right? So there are people who will say, I'm here to change things. I'm here to create a change and create transformation. But if there's no moral framework that sort of governs that change, then that change could actually be for the worse. And that's something interesting. You know, I've been out of the Seventh-day Adventist Church as an employer for many, many years. But, you know, I still have a lot of friends who are pastors and so on and teachers. And sometimes I talk with them. And at the church level, in many cases, we have no real sense as to how much turmoil there is at the institutional level. There's a lot of turmoil at the institutional level. Yeah, but that's my point. Yeah, and that's precisely where you'll find it, right? There's a big debate right now, for example, as to who will come after the current General Conference president steps down. And they have one person that's perhaps a front runner, and the big debate is, but he is the same thing. He's the same thing, just wearing a different suit. Nothing will change. And people are saying they're looking for change. But then there are others who are saying, no, because God says, I am the Lord, I change not. Misunderstanding of the text, of course. You know, it's really convenient to sit back and say, the reason why I don't want to do anything differently is that I am the Lord, I change not. And I usually point, by the way, to the story when Abraham was debating and sort of bargaining with God over Sodom and Gomorrah. Do you remember that? And God said to him, oh, I'm going to destroy them. And Abraham said, well, what if you find 10 faithful? Right? And Abraham engaged God in a discussion and saying, I would like you to step out of your plan and do this for me as your servant. Right? And God was interestingly accommodating.
Well, not only that, God accommodated Hagar.
Yes, absolutely. He accommodated a lot of people. And I would argue, I tell people, I find God more accommodating than most churches are. Right?
People said, we want a king.
Yeah, and God said, okay, this is not my idea. It is not a great thing, but you want one? Go ahead. And what did they do? They picked Saul. Yeah. Right? So yes, God has in fact been accommodating of us, but we are less. When I was in Seattle as a pastor many years ago, we're talking the 1980s here, so that's a really, really long time ago. I remember I said to the church during a sermon, and they got very upset. I said, you know, I'd rather fall in the hands of an angry God than an angry church board.
Oh, yes.
And they were offended. How dare you say such a thing? I said, because I will find God to be a lot more merciful, quite frankly, than the church board will. And I get it why it was offensive. So then, right? So transformational leadership relies on a person who is willing to make changes and they advance a vision. But that is only safe if, in fact, that person is rooted and grounded in a moral framework. And that brings us to redemptive leadership, right? Redemptive leadership really is kingdom-centered. The idea of initiating change and moving from one state to another is linked. It's transformational, by the way, but it is always rooted in the following purposes: justice. Right? So, redemptive leadership is transformational leadership rooted in justice. As Adventists, we don't want to talk about justice, right? The Adventist church has been woefully absent from some of the emergent civil rights issues going on in this country. Because we tell ourselves that the safe way to handle all these kinds of things is to just say, well, we need to separate church and state. Listen, we're not talking about church and state. We're talking about church and people, human beings, right? These social issues are only political issues if you make them political issues. But before they are political issues, they are moral issues, right? So when we talk about, regardless of your political ideology, when we talk about cutting back some of the benefits that people in need might have, those are moral issues. Those are moral questions before they're political questions. So redemptive leadership is transformational leadership rooted in justice, but it is also rooted in humility. Right? In qualitative research, which is another way of saying is interpretive research, we have certain research designs, right, that I teach to my classes. The most common, the most popular research design that is qualitative in nature is called phenomenology. You heard me talk about that a little later. That's essentially finding a phenomenon, a particular phenomenon, and asking and interviewing multiple people to give you their perspectives on that single phenomenon, right? But there is another, right? There is another design, and that design, which is a part of phenomenology, is called hermeneutic phenomenology. And then there's one called transcendental phenomenology. Let me tell you the difference. And I'm going to try not to get too deep into the weeds here, right? But then again, you invited me because you want to have a proper conversation, right? Okay. So hermeneutic, let's start with transcendental. Transcendental phenomenology is my deciding to do a study of registered nurses who work in emergency rooms. I've never been a nurse, right? I've never worked in an emergency room. I don't have a personal tie to that subject. I don't have any experience. But I'm going to study and ask nurses who work in an emergency room questions. So this notion of transcendental phenomenology means I'm finding out their understanding of that phenomenon from an outside perspective. I'm looking into something that I don't know much about, and I'm researching it. On the other hand, hermeneutic phenomenology is that I am a registered nurse, and I have worked in an emergency room, and I'm going to research with my fellow emergency room nurses what their experience is like in terms of how they cope with death and dying. But because I am a nurse, and I have a similar experience, my encounter with them is hermeneutic in nature. I'm a part of them, they are a part of me. Why did I bring that up when I'm talking about the importance of humility in redemptive leadership? Be humble enough to know your place as you try to understand people's experiences. Know when you are an outsider and don't belong. Are you hearing me? Because you have the Bible in your hand and faith in your mind doesn't make you an expert in everybody's experience. Don't think for a moment, if you've never been a single parent, that you understand everything that is to be said about single parenting. Be humble about it and be able to step out of yourself, right? You know, one of the ways I starkly put this to my students is that I say, look here. I said, this young lady over here, I've known you now for the past 3 years. You've shared a lot of your experience with me. I said, but no matter what, I can never be you because you're a woman. And I can jump and do cartwheels and go up and down, but I will never, in this life or any other life, understand what it means to be a woman. Humility demands that I respect the frameworks that I don't understand and am not a part of. That is redemptive leadership. When you begin to give people the room to be who they are and acknowledge the limitations of what you're trying to do with them, you're going to get a lot further. It is so much easier for us to take a stack of Bible lessons and think that this applies equally to every single person we encounter. Not so. Not so. That's important, right? So, redemptive leadership, which is transformational leadership, is rooted in justice, in humility, in service. It is also rooted in service, right? Leadership that has a purpose of bringing something that people actually want and need. Not what you think they want, but what they actually want and need. This is an important piece. And the last piece in terms of redemptive leadership is that it is always rooted in compassion. Compassion. The Seventh-day Adventist Church has been really very quiet as the United States faces some of the challenges associated with the government's current stance on immigrants and those deportations. The head of the Catholic Church before his demise a couple weeks ago was outspoken about it. The head of the Baptist Convention has been outspoken about it. The head of every major denomination has said, listen here, we understand the politics of this, but let's remember the humanity of it as well. That's all. And our church? So the question is, if it is a moral imperative to tell people that 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, but the 7 days is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God, how is it less of a moral imperative to say we are our neighbor's keepers? How is it less of an imperative? It isn't. But we're choosing our points of morality and choosing the ones that we want to emphasize. And what we're doing is choosing the ones we think are safe. And that is not redemptive leadership. And by the way, people are seeing this. We have a very savvy, intelligent population to deal with now. And they're watching all of this, and they're watching what the church is and what the church is not. Oh, yes, 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 yes. Yes. I know. That's right. Yeah. There have been a number of studies about millennials in particular, who are now in their 40s pretty much, right? And, yeah. But I'm saying on the high end. When we talk about millennials, we're really talking about those who are, between 30 and 40 nowadays, right? But, like Paul. He's in the category of W millennials. That's wishful millennials, right? So, you have those, and by the way, those are now losing faith in faith communities because they have seen that we talk a good game, but when it comes to the practice of those tenets of faith, we don't do it. They're seeing it, right? And by the way, the younger generation, they are even worse. Teenagers nowadays are so good at articulating what's missing from the faith community. And that's a bit of a challenge, right? And so if we're going to talk about redemptive leadership, then we need to look closely at what we're asking of them. So I want to do a couple things here with you very quickly. And I want to talk about redemptive leadership in a couple of the sectors where I have my work and my experience. And then I'm going to take, we're going to have some talking back and forth about it. I want to talk first about redemptive leadership in the context of healthcare, right? In the context of healthcare. I will say this, as I mentioned this morning, the development of the CARES program in Contra Costa County was one of those things that was really very highly problematic. Everybody did not endorse it, everybody did not embrace it. The law enforcement community felt that we were giving a wink and a nod to those who had broken the law by being present in the United States and undocumented. Right? So there were those types of issues. But more than that, there are tremendous healthcare disparities that really reflect some broader injustices that we need to pay attention to. And I believe as a faith community, we need to take a look at this. Jesus was about healing the sick, right? Right? So let's talk about this in healthcare, and I'll tell you how it manifests itself. There is a woman who I was just looking at her, if you want to call it a testimony yesterday, and she was talking about the fact that she has a son who is 22 years old, and he is nonverbal on the far right end of the autism spectrum. Okay? And autism, it's not so much a linear thing as we used to think, but autism is really something that more can be almost like dots all over a canvas. And how people, and we have a Secretary of Health and Human Services who is as ignorant about these subjects as anybody can get, but talks about them nonetheless. All right? And she was saying that her son is now 22. And in autism, on the autism spectrum, one of the things that they do is something called ABA therapy, and ABA therapy focuses on behavioral adjustments that children and adults on the autism spectrum need to have in order for them to function day to day. But ABA therapy is super expensive. If you have to pay for it out of pocket and it's an all-day therapy session that is center-based, it can come to thousands of dollars. So most of the major insurance companies will cover ABA to a certain extent. Kaiser does, Blue Cross Blue Shield, they do United Healthcare, most of the major insurances do. And Medicare as well, except that Medicare just made a determination that once a person who's on the autism spectrum reaches the age of 22, if they don't have it by then, they'll never get it. Then they just cut it off. As abruptly as I said it, that's exactly how it's done. Right? So then, where is the compassion for individuals with these intellectual disabilities? What are we saying? What message are we sending about the society that we live in? Right? When we say just because of age, nothing has changed about the person's diagnosis, by the way. They're still autistic, and the young man that I'm speaking about, he's nonverbal. He does not speak a single word. That is not uncommon in extreme cases of autism spectrum disorder. Not uncommon at all. Right? But the Medicaid, executives feel that, 22, that was good enough. We helped you for the past, child you was diagnosed when he was 3. We helped you for the past, 18 plus years or so. So we're done. Bye. And so they asked the parents, right, in this interview, how do you cope? They said, we don't know. We can't afford the thousands of dollars since Medicaid will no longer cover it. And we cannot tell the last night we had a full night of sleep because their son is a mover. 24 hours a day, he gets up and walks around. They have to watch the door all the time, right? They have to constantly watch the stairwell up and down, right? I'm just giving you an extreme case, right, to demonstrate that, we have a deficit of redemptive leadership acting with mercy and compassion and grace in our health care. Right? So there's a fight for access, there's a fight for dignity, a fight for compassionate care. But let me tell you this, Jesus and healing was central to Jesus' ministry. That was not accidental. Healing was central to his ministry. And so the very idea that we can just walk away from our community obligations in this way is troubling. So that's healthcare. But then redemptive leadership needs to be present in the education sector as well. Now, it's been many, many years, and I don't know if you remember this, Pat. Many, many years ago when I first moved to California, I had a long-term substitute teaching assignment in one of the school districts in San Jose, and I taught 6th grade math for a year. God help my soul. I still remember the trauma of that year, right? And I have a profound respect for those who teach that grade level, because they're about 13 at that age. My Lord. All right. But the education system has some serious issues with equity. You remember when Ayla was in middle school, her school and the school district she was in had an agreement with Apple where they would send them at the beginning of the school year with a MacBook. Do you remember that? She would bring it home, right? Now, you take that Silicon Valley located school system And you move, on the other hand, to the Oakland Unified School District. The dynamic is different. That's about it. They might have brought home a fruit, but that's about it. Because all of a sudden, those kids with just as much legitimate need did not have access to the same type of resources, right? So, knowing that and seeing that in my own experience, and although I work in higher education, I mean, I'm an educator, so that's a value to me. And so remember that fund I talked about, the Keller Canyon Mitigation Fund, in which I serve in the committee, and I still do? I proposed to them that we enter into an agreement with Google to purchase some Chromebooks because Google was offering the best deal, not because I think, that OS is the best thing since sliced bread or anything, or any bread for that matter. But it was, it was something, and it was better than nothing. And so I said, well, we have Bay Point, largely a Latino population, 60% Latino. Most do not speak English, but these kids are in school, and they don't have access to this stuff. And so I said to the committee, I think we should allocate money. Let's start off with $10,000, maybe $20,000, and acquire computers to give to these families so that their kids can come up ready to compete in the real world. They agreed to it. And then bureaucracy kicked in. The idea was, well, if we give them computers, they might watch pornography on it. And I remember looking at the administrator with incredulity, and I said, wait a minute. So do we then stop giving people EBT cards because they may buy unhealthy foods with it? Do we throw out the baby with the bathwater? Do we somehow think we've absolved ourselves of our moral and ethical responsibilities because there is the potential for misuse? When Jesus healed somebody, they could go back to living a sinful life. But it didn't stop him from healing them, did he? He still healed them. Yeah, exactly. He healed. And by the way, you're absolutely right. That's a perfect example. Only one came back to say thanks. But did he revoke the healing of the others? No. He said, were there not 10 cleansed of those 10 lepers? Where are the 9? Only one came back to say thank you. And so in the education sector, we have these types of disparities, and we're finding ways to excuse them. In higher education, for some communities, rising tuition. There's an elite kind of group in higher education who are trying to exclude others. But redemptive leadership, as far as education is concerned, works to widen the circle of opportunity. Proverbs 4:7 says, wisdom is supreme. Therefore, get wisdom. One more sector I want to talk about before I stop, and actually there's 2 more. Then I'm going to stop and we're going to have a discussion and some questions. So we talked about the fact that we need redemptive leadership in healthcare. We talked about it for education. I would think we need it in the government and public sector as well. All right, public trust has eroded in the government sector. People don't trust those of us who work in government anymore. And with good reason. With good reason. Because, we have demonstrated that we really can't be trusted because integrity just is missing from that political front. And I'll show you an example of how that works. And I'm sharing examples from my own experience so that it makes sense to you. I keep talking about this community called Bay Point. That's because they're the single largest community outside of the cities in Contra Costa County, for which I have some oversight. So Bay Point. Bay Point, poor, they don't have enough money, even though they're a population of 25,000. They couldn't become a city even if they wanted to. They don't have enough of a tax base for it, right? So a large number of individuals, largely Spanish-speaking, and you want to know what's interesting about it? The first thing that came to my attention about 10 years back about Bay Point is that their water, the water that the families use, costs more per gallon to use than water in any other city or jurisdiction in the entire of Contra Costa County. The poorest community paying the most for water. Okay. Really? It was also the water in Contra Costa County with the highest level of contaminants. So much so that it did not meet federal standards. Right? To save money, The company that ran the water utility, a Southern California company called Golden State Water, bought up the water rights. They said that they would not fluoridate the water because fluoridation is questionable science and fluoridation is too costly. So it was no surprise when Contra Costa Health did a study and determined that there were much higher rates of pediatric tooth decay in Bay Point than in any surrounding community. I'm giving you context here now. Why, again, people do not trust government, right? Yet, the California Public Utilities Commission, who has the authority to review rate increases when a utility wants to raise the water rates, kept rubber stamping the Golden State Water request for increase every year. It just kept going higher and higher and higher. Yeah. So it got to a point where now it's getting to the attention of politicians, and we're looking for ways to handle this, looking for ways to fight. We even appeared before the PUC and said, this is just not right. This is just not right. But they still kept giving them the rate increases. And of course, public pressure now started mounting because we started talking about it. Finally, what Golden State did is that they stopped doing their own water purification, connected their pipes to Contra Costa Water District, which is a public utility, and bought water from them. The advantage is that the water is now pure and clean. The disadvantage is it is still the most expensive. All right? So you take a situation like that, and people looking on and seeing that the government bodies that are charged with regulating things like this that's in our best interest, they couldn't even help us. We still end up with the worst end of the deal. That is an example of where redemptive leadership is needed. Micah 6:8 says, act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. And finally, before we stop for our conversation, there's one more sphere in which redemptive leadership is desperately needed. That's in the religious community, in the churches, right? Churches are good at preaching about compassion. We're just not good about being compassionate, right? See, compassion is inconvenient. Talking about it gives ourselves a pat on the back, right? Jesus said, whatever you do, you did for one of the least of these, you did it for me. So churches then are called to be sanctuaries of mercy, advocacy, and service, right? Advocacy and service. So churches, in fact, are called to play a particular role here. The church is the center, or should be the center, of mercy and grace and courage. So let me stop there for a moment. And I want us to think about this a little bit. Just think about your church for a moment. How do you think the Palo Alto church, this particular church, can be more engaged in this type of redemptive leadership? Think about it. What else can you do? What else can you do that you perhaps used to do at one point, but we've all gotten very busy. But more than that, how can you be a redemptive leader within your personal space at your workplace? And I'm open to conversations and hearing what you have to say. I know I'm asking a hard question. Yes.
David, I'm sure most of the people listening are, just like me, pretty uncomfortable with some of some of the topics you're bringing up, because it obviously challenges us and asks us to kind of look in the mirror.
Yeah.
And as you speak, we're reflecting against Jesus. Right?
Yeah.
That's what we are looking at. And I think that for me, when I look first of all. And he lived up to 33 years old or something like that. And if he wanted to build an actual church, he could have done so.
Yes.
Put it in Bethlehem or wherever he wanted to build it, and then go into the synagogue or the pulpit at the time and preach from the one location. Instead, it seems to me he planted a church in our hearts, and so he chose different people from different walks of life. Um, that's the church. And so if I think of myself as a pebble being dropped into the water and will ripple out, I now have to ask myself, what can I do
Mhm.
to bring transformative, redemptive leadership with humility
Yeah.
into this whichever space I enter? Right? That's my challenge. And I think I can't do that on my own. It is with God's help,
Yeah.
with prayer, because it's a challenging task. But yet it's the mission that Jesus has asked us to.
Yeah.
So those are the thoughts that are with me as I listen to you,
Mhm.
bring this to us. I don't know what other folks
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. As you begin to think, and I'll come to you next, Julian, as you begin to think about this, let me ask you this. Do you think that one of the potential challenges to being a transformative, redemptive leader, right, with a strong moral compass, may just be that we confuse the message with the mission? And we think that as long as we preach the message, then we don't have to engage in the work of the mission? Could that be a part of it? Something to think about. Julian.
I have a comment and a question.
Mm-hmm.
To the point of being more of a redemptive leader,
Mm-hmm.
the workplace, your own personal space within the church, I think for me, I'm convicted of two things. One is to bring the outside world into the church so that we focus our preaching, that education, that time that we spend educating ourselves on the word, also educating ourselves on the actual humans that the word applies to, what they're going through, what is important in their lives, so that when we sit with them and talk to them about what's happening in their lives, we're not uneducated about how hard life is.
That's what we call epistemic humility this morning.
Right.
Understanding that you don't run from the culture, you just find a way to make sure that it does not become you, right? And you have to pray for the strength to expose yourself to the people who need you without taking on the very attributes you would like to get away from.
Mm-hmm. And then I think conversely also bringing the teachings of the church to my workplace or what have you, to have conversations that say, how, make these redemptive points that you're talking about, where uh, saying that I care more about compassion or what have you than
Mhm.
promotion, or
Yeah.
that's ultimately what people should be focused on, or that having conversations with friends, that the need for community and fellowship
Mhm.
is what will bring them happiness, not another TikTok video
Yeah.
or money,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And being sort of a little bit more courageous about saying that to people
Mhm.
and feeling convicted that my way is right.
Yeah.
So that's what I think I'm trying to
Yeah.
live
Mm-hmm.
and learn. I think my question is that in spite of what we want the church to be, what we want the government to be, what we want our workplace to be, there's this devil's advocate on the shoulder that asks, can we do all those things and still stay solvent, right? Can we provide the health care? Can we
Mhm.
right? Can we invite an immigrant and still have a country, still have a tax base,
Yeah.
still, right? And I think this is one of the questions
Mhm.
that always comes up.
Yeah.
If we want to do everything for everyone,
Mhm.
do we end up doing nothing for
Anyone. Yeah.
anyone?
Very good
How do we
question.
balance that?
Yeah, very good perspective. I used to tell people all the time that I believe the United States has a right to protect its borders. Right? And I used Guyana as an example. I said, look, the Guyana Defense Force will meet you and arrest you and lock you up or put you out if you cross into our borders. And we're a little tiny speck out there in northeastern South America. And if small nations like Guyana have the prerogative and the right to defend their borders, the United States must also be able to defend their borders. So for me, the question is not whether or not we relinquish sovereignty in that regard, but rather how we deal with those individuals who are here now, right? The ones who are here now. What do we do with them, right? What do we do with them? And my argument is not so much that we are tacitly saying it is okay to get here by those means. What we are saying, though, is now that you are here, right, let's talk about how we can be humane in our dealings with you. All right? My sense is that, for those of us who are parents, if there has not been just yet, there will come a point at some point in your life when your child or children will do something that will be sorely disappointing for you. It will always happen. And when it does, because you are a parent, you will find a way to extend mercy. You will find a way to extend grace. And you don't necessarily say, okay, you cease being my son. That's not how God deals with us, right? So compassion is what I'm saying must drive all of our policies. This does not mean we relinquish things like enforcement and so forth. You're absolutely correct. Let's talk, for example, with the conversation we're having now about Medicaid, right? Medicaid is really not sustainable in its current format, right? Neither is Social Security, right? Social Security is an entitlement, but it is not, as the government sometimes gives us the impression, that it's actually a retirement account in which you invest. So Social Security sends out once a year or so these reports in terms of if you retired now, you retired in 5 years, this will be a monthly Social Security payment. That's the biggest farce ever, because that's not how it works. See, here's what's happening. What you are working for now, Julian, is what's paying the current recipients of Social Security. And when you are ready for Social Security, if it manages to survive, your children and grandchildren will have to pay for you. So it is not a case where you paying into Social Security now and the money is set aside in an interest-bearing account and that is Julian's retirement money, don't touch it. That's not how Social Security works, right? It is not a retirement account. It doesn't work that way. So that said, right, if something doesn't change about it, it will not be solvent before long. But again, the question is, does that mean that we pull that safety net from everyone now in order to protect some different idea of what a future should look like? So it's a balancing act, right? I'm okay with the fact that I'm working right now and paying into Social Security, and that money is going to pay those who are now retired, who worked and came before me.
Thank you.
I'm okay with that, right? I'm okay with that. I'm okay with paying a little more taxes so my neighbor can have health insurance like I have health insurance, because that, in my view, is what it means to be a Christian. To not just look out for myself and for my family, but for your family as well. Yes?
I think today, looking back in history, Social Security was never meant to be
That's right.
permanent.
It was not.
And so over time, for some reason, yes, it's an entitlement to get some benefits.
Right.
But I think today people rely too much as an entitlement
Yeah.
program forever, but not having an obligation,
Mhm.
or not seeing the obligation,
Yeah.
that they have a part in that.
I've always taken the position that government lives with one faulty assumption. There's an article I wrote on this, the 5 assumptions that make government hard to navigate, right? And that article is on the web. It's easy to find. And one of those assumptions is the assumption of perpetuity, that whenever we start something, it's supposed to last forever. Social Security was an outgrowth of the Great Depression and the reaction to that. It was supposed to be temporary, and it should have been gone already. So they are right. In its current model, it is not solvent. We know that. The problem is that we start these programs, and once we start them, we don't know how to end them, even when they have reached their natural end of life.
You know how to
Yeah.
expand them.
Yes, we do. And they get bigger and bulkier. So there has to be some other solution to this crisis that's of our own making, unfortunately. Did you know, by the way, that certain municipalities had the option of opting out of Social Security altogether? And they did. The city of Oakland, none of their employees pay into Social Security. Well, yeah, if they want to. But at one point, when I was working for the city of Oakland, we didn't even have the option.
But all the churches have that option.
Yeah,
All churches
have the option to step out. And that's a religious exemption. And so a lot of municipalities have that too. So the reality is that everybody isn't necessarily paying into Social Security.
Well, look, I mean, I don't want to make this a discussion about Social Security, but the thing is, if there is a need, because Social Security has become the need that it is today, because you used to be able to depend on a pension from your place of work
Well, that's true.
to see you through.
Yeah, yeah.
That doesn't happen anymore. And the people that complain the most about, Social Security not being there and wanting to get rid of Social Security are the same people who got rid of our pensions.
It's interesting.
So the thing is, Social Security could have worked if they had modified it and structured it so that it was an investment.
Yeah.
The government could have been taking those dollars and investing them, and they would have been available to people in the future.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they
You want to
haven't.
make this a discussion of Social Security.
No.
The history of the fact is that it was originally supposed to be what the government called a lockbox. And when they opened the box, they found a big IOU.
Yeah.
The government spent the money for other purposes and left Social Security bankrupt.
Properly, not adequately funded.
Supposed to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it is
Not
not
a box,
it
but
is
it
not
should
an
have been
unfunded
invested.
liability.
That's correct. And that's a bit of a challenge. So in light of something like that, what then do you see is the role of the church going forward? We're talking about redemptive leadership after all. So in light of what is likely about to happen, because there's always been this precipice looming, not just in Social Security, but in other entitlement programs as well. And so what then is the role of the church? Are we supposed to suddenly become the ones who dole out the cash? What is our role in terms of being redemptive leaders? Paul?
Well, I'm not like a big Ellen White fan or anything like that, but
Are you a little one? Okay.
I'm a great admirer of her
Okay.
as a transformative and redemptive
Leader? Okay.
with a moral compass.
Okay.
And to your point about church leaders being silent, I get the Pacific Union Recorder, I get Adventist Journey, all the beautiful glossy publications that the Adventists are so good at putting out.
Right.
They're top of their game in terms of publishing, right? Ellen White used to write in these various publications at a time when, during the time of, when the slaves were free.
Emancipation.
There was this discussion about should the black people worship with the white people and all this kind of stuff, right? And she was very much calling the church to like, yeah, these people were just released from slavery. They may not be equal to us, but they're God's people, and chastising the church for their behavior of, the ex-slaves and stuff like that, and funding Oakwood University. I think you're an alumni of that university. So as a leader, she put out messages what its message should be in terms of Jesus's calling. I thought she was a
Is that mic like a placebo or something? Because nothing changed once he got it.
yeah, nothing. Yeah, this does not have any volume or anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And the thing about it is that I mentioned the Adventist Journey, Pacific Union Recorder. In none of those magazines, it's almost like you're in a vacuum world.
Yeah.
You're in a parallel universe. You wouldn't even know that the world is in chaos because they're so not spectrum. The normal stuff, the official stuff.
Yes,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
Independent.
Yeah. So if you read just the Adventist Journey and Pacific Union Recorder, you're living in like a vanilla vacuum.
Utopia.
Utopia, exactly. Right. Yeah. It's like quarterbacking.
So the question
to
is
heaven.
then, is the church doing better at ignoring the social
There we go.
state of the world, the moral state of the world, by focusing on a future heaven, so much so to the detriment of paying attention to the current hell? I mean, could it be that that's it? It's easier to talk about the time of trouble, and it's easier to talk about the second advent than it is to tackle issues of inequity in our churches today. It's an easier conversation to have about those spiritual things, those almost ethereal things, rather than the practical issues that that we're faced with today. And maybe that may be part of the dynamic here.
From a young person's perspective, I wish I could say that the church has gotten to a place where we were just focusing on heaven. But in fact, I think for a lot of younger people, the church has been an adversary spiritually. Right?
Interesting. Okay.
I think that I have a lot of friends who are not Christians, but more and more I find myself surrounding myself with people who believe in love as a concept, right? People who believe in compassion and talking about their feelings as men and, like actually creating fellowship.
Yeah.
But they're not Christian. And that's because, they're not religious. And that's because religion in my childhood, from a lot of people where we grew up, and probably a lot of people around the world, was just an adversary. It was telling them, don't do this, you are wrong, you're bad, if you do these things, you're going to go to hell, right? So I wish I could say that the church was just focused on heaven and isn't even trying to give back, but in fact, it is doing a lot of harm to the spirituality of young people. And we need to, I think before, like Joan was talking about bringing these people back into the church, and I think we need to rectify that before we can even begin to think about how can we, start dealing with social issues, because we haven't even dealt with our spiritual issues, right?
Absolutely. Let me talk briefly, and we're going to begin to wrap up shortly, but I want to talk briefly about Nehemiah. And I'm not going to read much from the Bible on this, but I want to talk about a couple of things that I have identified in Nehemiah's example as a redemptive leader. Number one, he had a sensitivity to injustice, and so he mourned over injustice. So if you're going to become a redemptive leader, it begins by first developing a sensitivity to what's wrong so that we can know what needs to be addressed. We can't pretend that things aren't what they are. You need to be sensitive to what people's needs are. So that's one. We mourn over injustice. Nehemiah did. Next, Nehemiah prayed. He prayed deeply before acting, right? In our interest to think and plan strategically, we should not discard the value of praying and seeking divine guidance, right? Then we move to strategic planning. And what I mentioned this morning, Nehemiah also resisted with courage and grace. We have to be strong enough to resist things that we know are inconsistent with what our Lord and Savior teaches, right? And here's something important. Nehemiah focused on reforming injustices within his own ranks before looking elsewhere. So, if we can't reform injustices within our church, within our homes, within our communities, how can we expect to reform justice externally? We have to begin by fixing what's broken on the inside, right? And, a lot of us are, in fact, broken. There are people in the church who are broken. There are methods that we employ that are broken. And then we need to model what it means to actually lead faithfully and redemptively, right? And I will say this, and I'm going to move on to the next slide here. And one of the things we have to do as we look at integrating faith with this leadership is that we need to really engage in some regular self-examination. We don't do it. We don't do that enough, right? We don't look, and one of the things I want to suggest, by the way, if you want to begin to address some of these issues, you want to develop and become a really, truly redemptive leader, you need to build a system of ethical accountability circles. By that I mean, you should be able to call into someone who's a part of your faith community to bounce off ideas about what you're doing and how it impacts the rest of the people around you. You see, sometimes we, as Christians, we even see God as being this transcendent, distant God, not remembering that the essence of who God is also immanence, right? Isaiah said in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. Transcendence and immanence. God is just as interested in the regular, dirty, day-to-day activities in which you're involved, right? Not just the higher level types of things, right? So you need to really look at holding each other accountable, even in our households. In many of our households, particularly as we grow older, we lead these very disparate lives where one person may be a person who prays and the other may not be. And it's easy for that to happen in a very, very busy world. And I would put this thought here for you from Frederick Buchner. Your vocation is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet, which means you have to take stock of where the needs are in the world around you, and that will point you to your vocation, because you will feel a passion to fill the need. For me, education has always been a passion. A student came to me on Thursday night, Alex, just before we met planning for today, and she said, I came to office hours not because I need clarification on anything, but because I know this is your last office hours before the term ends, and I don't know if I'll get to see you before graduation. I want to tell you something. I want to thank you for being interested in how well I do. Now, that was a surprise to me because I don't get students coming to say that kind of thing too often, right? This is a graduate student, and she said, I want to thank you. I came to thank you for being interested in what I do. See, I tell my students, I want you to be clear. Your family comes before me and this class, and you will never have to apologize. If your family priorities conflict with this, it is my responsibility to make the accommodation, not yours. All right? 20 years later, I know my vocation is teaching, because that's what fills my heart with satisfaction. Education for me is a vocation born of a passion for people to learn and understand and advance. You need to find your vocation as a redemptive leader by looking around and seeing what triggers you. What triggers you? What creates a sense of passion in you? It may be something that you may think is small, right? I met an old sister who said, I love to crochet. And I said, well, what do you do with the things once you crochet? Oh, I take them to the children's hospital. I said, and what do they do with them? They give them to the families. Do you ever meet any of the families? Not much. But I hear they're very thankful. She said, I found my vocation through my passion for crocheting and sending stuff to the children's hospitals. As a redemptive leader, What you need to do is find your vocation, and that's where your leadership will emerge. As we wrap it up, and I'd like to wrap it up for sure within the next 5 to 10 minutes. I want to talk just a bit with you about this whole notion of where you think your transformational leadership can begin. What's your vocation? What do you do that can bring satisfaction and blessing to others that others may not see as valuable? Think about it for a moment. What can you do, whether you're doing it now or not? Just think about it for a moment, and please share what thoughts you might have. Uh-huh.
I recently came up with an answer for myself for this. I've recently started a podcast.
Oh.
Don't know exactly how far it will go.
Could you hold the microphone close, please, Julian?
Yeah, sure. Hi. Yes, I was saying I started a podcast.
Wonderful. Thank you.
That gives me an outlet to talk about topics that have been on my heart for a long time.
Good.
And bring perspectives that I feel are lacking in other spaces, of which this conversation about faith is going to be very important too, because I think that Brandon and I and young people who are of, in faith communities are in some ways the very few translators left, these kind of bilingual people who understand what it means to have a rich, religious, church-filled life and a community that supports that, but also understand why people may not opt into that.
Good.
And so that's something that I think I'll be doing.
That's awesome. I like it. I like that. Very good. You're finding your vocation. What else? What else are you folks thinking about that may be your vocation, your passion that sort of helps you develop your redemptive leadership?
Well, I don't know if it's a vocation, but it's something that I've found myself doing more than I ever thought I would.
That's where it begins.
And that's giving financial advice to friends who have found themselves in significant debt. And oftentimes the reasons why they're in debt is not just a lack of education, but also personal issues which they haven't resolved, things that they can't stop doing or things they refuse to do because of their pride or insecurities or whatever. So.
And you become a voice because they're more likely to listen to you than somebody like me. Yeah, so that becomes your voice, right? Excellent. That's good. Anyone else? What have you found is that area of passion for you that could well become your vocation for this redemptive leadership? Don't be shy.
Well, I find myself always encouraging others to pray.
Good.
I good at prayers, and I know that is my starting point.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned that because just last night I was thinking about the fact that prayer and the ability to pray fervently is a spiritual gift. Right? It is a spiritual gift. And so something like that should never be understated. You should never be shy about talking about that as your pathway to redemptive leadership. Thank you for sharing that.
Amen.
Yeah. Who else? What else might you do? We'll take a couple more. Right here. Microphone right here, please.
The comment that was made about lending a voice in financial situations, I had done that earlier. I don't do it now.
Okay.
But most of the time it didn't sink in.
Yeah.
But when it sank in, it was to have somebody come back and say it really changed their life.
Yeah.
To start them. And it's hard for me to understand why they don't think of it themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
To me, it's obvious, because I was taught when I was little.
Yeah. And some of us had the benefits of the guidance that was good for us.
Yeah.
Some of us ignored it, some of us did it, some of us just didn't embrace it, just didn't value it. But thank you. Yes, Paul.
Not everyone has had that benefit.
That's true. Absolutely. Yeah. Hmm.
I'm just going to read what my sister just texted to me. She may be online. This is Miglin. In Merced, there is an undocumented family from El Salvador
Okay.
with a 7-year-old daughter and a new baby. Our pastor and board of the Merced Adventist Church made a decision to protect that family from ICE. They are also providing free education for that family at the Adventist school, helping them with a car for transportation. As you know, Merced has a large farming community with lots of immigrant families who are now in fear of deportation.
Yeah. The reality of our circumstances. Steve?
I've been giving thought to your question, and my answer to it is more reflective than prospective in terms of future.
Okay.
When I started here at Palo Alto, when you were our pastor, one of my passions was preaching. I loved researching and studying and preparing for sermons, and eventually it would have become my vocation for a number of years.
An accountant with a minor in theology.
Yeah.
I remember.
I'm saying this now because it might mean something to somebody who is looking for that perspective. Now that it is behind me, so to speak, I can't tell you how much I miss it.
Yeah.
Just this week, in a private moment, in my own mind, I asked myself the question, why did you not stick with it?
Well, you preach once in a while.
I think it's more than the preaching component for Steve.
Because,
Yeah.
No, but at least that's where it began for me in terms of this vocation that had me around here in Palo Alto for 15 years.
Yeah.
And sometimes I miss it.
Yeah.
I miss the involvement.
Yeah.
I miss the excitement of, getting into the Word and studying and preparing with that as a purpose in mind to bring something meaningful to a community of brethren. So if you are in your vocation, stick with it because of the passion and hold on to it. It is something meaningful even in reflection.
Okay. Thank you.
Pastor Steve, if I may add something.
Yes, go ahead, and then we have a couple others, Dr. Alex, and of course. Go ahead, Donald.
Oh, yeah, just to add to what Pastor Steve was saying, I recall when he eulogized Sister Anderson, he said that, when he became pastor, but when you became pastor, Pastor Steve, you enjoyed preparing for sermons, but then it dawned on you that you had to take care of people. And Sister Anderson was one example where, in your capacity as a pastor, it opened up all these other avenues for you to really minister and take care of people in very practical, humanistic sort of ways. So I just wanted to add to that.
Thank you, Donald. Thank you. Yes.
Yes, I was going to say that most of you know that I'm a physician and I'm very busy with my own clinic and also busy at the hospital.
Yeah.
And also busy here in a way. But what I have found to be helpful is to be able to treat everybody the same.
Mm-hmm.
And allow, even when somebody makes a mistake towards you, when you are able to put yourself in that person's shoes it tones down what may come naturally to a human, to be upset because somebody made a mistake against you. So attempting to treat people the same
Yeah.
is very helpful to leadership. And also allow yourself to give people a break
Hmm.
because you know that you yourself, you are not perfect.
That's right.
And that is what I've found to be very redemptive for me in the leadership roles that I've played.
Absolutely.
To be able to do that is very, very helpful. And also, it allows you to not be a micromanager, trying to do everything, because it helps you trust in other people's talent.
Yeah.
And it makes your work easier. You look good, but you look good because of other people.
Yeah. Thank you. Bert, you had a comment?
Well, like Pastor Steve, I still preach once in a while here, but I guess our greatest, my wife and I, who's not here today for reasons I've explained to some people, we are living where we are living now because about 9 years ago our daughter called and said, "Mom, I'm having twins. You've got to come and be my nanny." And we sold the house and moved into a bedroom in their house, and subsequently have a little house has been put behind the big house.
Uh-huh.
So we live on a 2-home compound, 3 generations.
Wow.
Our kids, both our son-in-law and our daughter, grew up in Adventist families, church employees. Neither has much interest at all in the church now. But we have a wonderful relationship with our kids.
Yeah.
I make the pot of coffee every morning, and they come over before they take the kids to school, and we hang out for a while every morning.
Yeah.
I go pick up the kids every afternoon. We're together a lot, and I think we're being influential in raising those twins.
That's important. Yeah.
And that's an avocation
That's your
for us.
vocation. Yes, it is. I love it. Love it. Thank you so very much. And I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up. But I want to tell you something that happened last night, and then I'm going to leave it at that for today. Last night, as I was sort of reviewing what I would cover today, something struck me in the oddest way. And I'm saying this in the context of what Steve just mentioned. All right? Many, many years ago, Calvin Mosley, who has long since been deceased, the founder of the Religion and Theology Department at what was then Oakwood College, right, way back when in the 1950s, he once made a comment to a group of us theology students in a class. He said, "There are some who are called to ministry because God sees that as their path to redemption." God sees that as their path to redemption. And I realized that in ministry, I found myself embracing the sense of responsibility and obligation that came with ministry, and so was a lot more focused on my own spirituality as a result. And it all came back to me last night, and I thought to myself, would I have spent this much time studying these texts and looking at these passages and developing this if I was doing it without the purpose for which I've been called to Palo Alto? And the answer didn't take long. I might not have. And then what Dr. Mosley said came back to mind. Sometimes ministry is our path to our own redemption. And so I'm telling you, this vocation we're talking about, this identifying what's your thing for transformative leadership, it might well be your path to redemption. Ministry and service can do that to you. And that's where we're going to stop for today. I appreciate the opportunity again to come down and meet and share these 3 sessions with you. I'm going to turn it over to Alex and ask him to do our closing prayer. Oh, okay.
Yes. So,
Yeah, the microphone I think you need.
Do you have a microphone? Oh, the Zoom. Okay. Can you hear me any better? Oh, okay. All right. So,
Yes, we can hear you, Paul.
oh, thanks,
Thank you.
Paul. Yeah. So, first of all, thanks be to God that we have a church here at Palo Alto where we're open to learn and to grow. I also want to say thanks to the ladies that prepared a beautiful potluck that really made the day even more special, right? I mean, you can't have a great Sabbath, a great Sabbath without a great potluck and sharing the things we learned from the morning sessions, and then to be able to have a very special session this afternoon. And I also appreciate that Palo Alto is a church where we can have differing opinions and challenge each other. That's been the tradition of this church, where we live in the discomfort. Thank you, David. We live in the gray because we're not seeking the black and white, and that we all have the humility to learn from each other. And then I want to personally thank my friend, Dr. David Fraser, for taking the time to come all the way from, where is it? Oakley. Okay. So we're not going to ask him to come, well, I don't know if you can find Oakley on a map, but it's in California. All the way from Oakley, and got here before we did, and is able to just beautiful sessions, right? Yeah. So big round of applause.
Don't make it the last time.
All right. And I also want to share just as a quick story about David and how I view him, because the first I heard about David Fraser was from Joan's youngest brother, who has now passed away. Ian was going to Oakwood College, and he was a student when David was the resident assistant.
Oh boy.
He was the most, coming from an Adventist background of over a century, his grandmother and everyone, great-grandparents, Adventism. He was the zealot. He was like Paul. There wasn't a window on a Saturday night where he was not guarding to prevent them getting to the dance hall. They could not, whenever he was on patrol, they couldn't go to the Saturday night dance. The most feared RA on the building. So just like Paul in the Bible, who persecuted the Jews, you could not find a more fundamentalist Adventist than this guy.
True.
So this is your farewell.
But just like Paul, who is able to get out of the box, and what he's doing now is ministering to the Gentiles, the public sector. It's an example for us as we navigate the world. And so the lessons you've brought us are very real, because your Pauline journey is a great example. So you're giving us lessons from a very authentic place. And you've shared a lot of your personal journey with us, and we appreciate that transparency and you opening up to us. And we love you, and we thank you. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you all very much. Did we pray to end?
No, you go ahead.
I thought you prayed.
I didn't. I asked you to.
Oh, you asked me to? Yeah. Okay. All right. Let us pray. Our Father and our God, you are the source of all wisdom and knowledge. So, Lord, this afternoon, we want to thank you for being such to David, Dr. Fraser, and to each one of us. So, Lord, what we have learned from you. And Lord, we pray that you'll also give us the strength and the desire to apply to our lives. So, Lord, bless David. And as we always say, give him more to share with others. But, Lord, as we also receive, help us to also pass it on to others. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, David.